Art is a wonderful thing that can come in many different forms. Paintings, sculptures, portraits, poetry, writing, music, all are a form of art in their own right. The one thing that they all have in common is that they can tell a story. Video games are no different. From their visuals, to the story, to the soundtrack that plays in the background, it is all art. Anyone who claims that a video game is not art clearly does not understand what the meaning of it is. Eve is an adventure game developed by a Japanese artist by the name of Kaori. It was created using the RPG Maker 2000 game engine. Unlike many other horror-orientated RPG Maker games, Eve takes a more psychological horror approach. It results in a game that plays with the player's expectations, often placing them in terrifying scenarios unlike anything you've seen before. Eve released February 27th, 2012. The story of Eve starts off where the main character, a 9-year-old girl called Eve, visits an art museum with her parents. The museum is an art collection of an artist called Gyurtena Wise. What starts off as a standard day at the museum quickly begins to turn into an artistic nightmare. The museum turns from being full of life with people admiring the many masterpieces of the artist to being completely empty and devoid of even a single life. With the museum's lights turned off and nobody to be found, strange occurrences begin to happen. Noises can be heard, paintings seemingly moving and coming to life, and strange messages left scattered around the rooms. It isn't long, however, before you're transported to a place that resembles the museum, but is far from it. Like with many of these games, the story is why you play them over any other aspect. To say any more about it would ruin the entire point of playing it to begin with. The story to Eve is certainly interesting, and at certain points throughout the game can change depending on the decisions that you make. These changes result in there being plenty of replayability in the game, making it worth playing more than once. In total there are 7 different endings to the game. The developer uses the story to their advantage. With Kaori being an artist, the game revolves around art as does its story. It really is a fascinating tale, and one that can go in many directions. As far as RPG Maker games go, their stories do not get much more creative than this. Eve takes a Silent Hill approach to how its world works, and this is where its psychological horror comes in. Basically, there are 2 different dimensions, the real art museum and another dimension of it. While you start in the real world, it isn't long before you enter a dangerous and twisted version of it. A world where paintings and sculptures have the capability of coming to life and harming anyone that is not like them. The world is filled with paintings of all shapes, sizes, themes and tones. The world has no behaviour pattern to it, resulting in an unsettling realisation that it can throw anything at you at any time. The world constantly changes as you progress, and worst of all, becomes more dangerous. Monsters become more plentiful and quicker, resulting in them becoming trickier to avoid. Another influence from the Silent Hill series, Silent Hill 2 to be exact, is that the world reacts differently to different people. For example, it reacts differently to Eve than it does to another character you meet called Gary. In one part of the game where Gary gets separated from Eve and another girl called Mary, you switch between controlling both Gary and Eve. As you progress through the area as Gary, you begin to realise that this world is targeting him specifically. It begins to take shape into his worst fears and things that genuinely unnerve him, while with Eve, it remains the same as it has all along. In order to escape and return to the real world, you have to solve puzzles, along with figuring out exactly what the dimension is. Puzzles come in many different forms, but like any good puzzle, the hint to solving it is generally right in front of you. It's just a case of having to figure it out. While the gameplay to Eve is rather simple, its world makes it feel far more. The alternate dimension is an interesting, at times beautiful, and a downright terrifying place to be. The world of Eve is intelligent, and takes an approach that allows the developer to create almost anything that their imagination can muster. Like I previously stated, the developer is an artist. Creating a game revolving around art, and a world that too revolves around it, is ingenious. Kaori really lets the imagination fly, and with that creates a horrifying experience that will be sure to stick with you for life. Everything about Eve gives a sense of loneliness and vulnerability. You take control of a child in a world that is full of monstrosities that are attempting to get you. You've no way of defending yourself. and even Gary, who is older, is still not much more than a mere child himself. Even with his company, there is never a sense of protection. The world helps create that, as it is devoid of all life with the exception of Gary and Mary. The only things to be found are killer paintings and sculptures. The music helps add to the overall atmosphere of the game. Often, the music contains a slow and haunting tune, ever more increasing the impact of a sensation of loneliness and vulnerability. When it comes to danger, the music changes into a faster paced track while keeping a haunting tone to it. The world of Eve and its atmosphere deliver a sense of loneliness and vulnerability that many games attempt, yet fail to deliver. I have not played many of these RPG Maker horror games, but I can say out of those that I have, Eve sits at the top. Everything about it is simply unsettling. Its world, its story, its characters, its monsters and atmosphere. Its unpredictable nature helps only improve the sense of horror and fear. The fact that the decisions made throughout the game impact the story and change the outcome is something I would never have expected of an RPG Maker game. The developer may have been limited to what they could do due to the limitations of the engine, but they put everything into it that they could possibly do. It's a game that is perfectly paced. It doesn't move too quickly, allowing for fear to set in between each encounter. It's a game that plays with your expectations and begins to get into your head. This is what psychological horror is. It is where it gets into your head to the point that your very mind creates the fear that you experience. Psychological horror is a rarity in all forms, be it movies, video games or books. It's a form of horror that I truly love and wish that there was more of. I would add Eve with confidence up there with other great psychological horror games like Silent Hill, The Cat Lady and Sanitarium. If you are more into jump scares, Eve may not quench your horror tastes, but if psychological horror is for you, this game is certainly a must play. Thank you very much for watching. Join me in the next episode of Indiewatch, where we take a look at a horror point and click adventure that is unlike any other.